A Great Leap Toward the Future, Mao Zedong. China stands as one of the greatest nations in the world today, having the world's highest population and the second largest economy. It is home to a rich culture and heritage like the Great Wall, martial arts, and Eastern philosophy. But when we think of China, a more prominent brand defines it: communism. Now, there are a lot of communist states in the world, but why is it that other than Russia, China is the most renowned? Why does the international arena have a general dislike of communism? Is communism inherently bad? How did it shape China? This series will answer all of these questions and more. China's developments can be explained through the lens of the prominent figures that helped shape China into how it is today. China's communist legacy can be traced back to the first figure that comes to mind when we think of communist China: Mao Zedong, an intellectual, revolutionary, and leader who led China to its first quest towards the communist revolution. Mao was born to a peasant family in the farm village of Shaoshan in the Hunan province on December 26, 1893. As early as 6, he began to help his parents in working on their 3-acre farm in the early mornings and evenings. His father pretty much dictated the course of his life and sent him to study in the Shaoshan village school to learn basic literacy and calculation using the abacus. For Mao's career path was set to being his father's apprenticeship in their rice shop. The context under which Mao grew up, witnessing China being at its lowest point. By then, the 250-year imperialist rule of the Qing dynasty was on the brink of collapse due to a series of defeats from Japan and Britain in the Opium Wars, as well as the threat of Western dominance. This, along with the writings of his time, influenced Mao's political opinion. Mao was a wide reader of novels about Chinese history. There was this one particular book which talked about the need for China to adjust to the rapid changes in the modern world, such as industrialization and government reforms. This particularly struck Mao and gave him the desire to continue his studies further. Mao was exposed not only to news from outside China, but also to what was happening in the local scene, which expanded his feelings and passion for politics. He witnessed famines, heard the news of secret society uprisings, beheaded rioters, and unjust verdicts favoring landlords. Yet he pretty much still did not approve of violence as a resort to fight against these injustices. His father was eventually convinced that studying further would allow Mao to become a better earner and agreed to enroll Mao in a school in Xiangxiang, a school that interested Mao due to its brand of being radical and its emphasis on having new knowledge from the West. We see here that Mao was pretty much obsessed with Western thought and couldn't get enough of it. And indeed, it was there that he was given a wider perspective of the world and contemporary events. At the same time, he was still fascinated by the long and deep history of China. Eventually, Mao moved to another city in 1911, to yet another school in Hunan's capital, Changsha, wherein radical newspapers were widely available. It was there that his revolutionary spirit finally awakened and took action. He was inspired by the uprisings of the revolutionary leader Sun Yat-sen and his supporters. He then joined student demonstrations and chopped off his queue of hair, symbolizing his rejection of the monarchy and acceptance of reform. He sought to join the Revolutionary Army in Wuhan, but failed only because he took a while looking for waterproof shoes, as Wuhan was known to have rainy weather. Before having found the shoes, Changsha was already occupied by revolutionary forces, and Mao was forced to be a mere spectator rather than a participant. The Qing dynasty finally collapsed after a military mutiny in Wuhan in October 1911. In 1912, the last emperor abdicated, and China, for the first time in history, became a republic and ended the 2,000-year imperial rule. It seemed like the road towards the realization of the revolutionary dream was already laid down with a new type of government, a republic aligned with the modern world. But as Mao soon came to witness and realize, this revolutionary success was only temporary. The new rulers were just as corrupt and ruthless, and China's conditions did not improve. Mao briefly worked in Beijing after graduating from Changsha Middle School in 1918 at 24 years old. It was there that he was influenced by the future principal figures of China's own Communist Party, Li Dajiao and Chen Duqiu. It was also during this time that Mao came across the time when the May 4th movement of 1911 was already on its way to fruition, marking a period of political change wherein Chinese radicals started to abandon Western liberalism as a solution for China's problems in favor to Marxism and Leninism. This led to the formation of the Chinese Communist Party in 1921. Before joining the CCP, Mao wrote a series of writings criticizing the ills of China and even organized student strikes in Changsha, where he was met with harsh repression and his writings were confiscated and destroyed. Yet Mao was unfazed and continued to write essays, even referencing Lenin's revolution in Russia. But it was not until January 1921 that Mao became a fully committed Marxist. In 1923, the Young Communist Party joined an alliance with Sun Yat-sen's party, the Kuomintang. Mao was among the first to work with them. When Mao returned to Shaoshan in 1924, he witnessed the political consciousness that began to seep into the peasantry when several Chinese were shot by foreign police in Shanghai. Mao realized that there was an inherent revolutionary spirit in the peasantry, whom he previously perceived as backward and ignorant despite coming from the same background. It was then that Mao organized these peasantry protests into a network of peasant associations. When Sun Yat-sen died in 1925 and Chiang Kai-shek succeeded, Chiang broke the alliance between the CCP and the Kuomintang and expelled most of the communists from the party. Chiang allied with the landlords instead and annihilated the CCP in the cities, which forced them to retreat to the countryside. This was a signal for Mao to organize the peasantry and led them toward a revolution to gain control of China. A civil war then commenced. In 1931, the Chinese Soviet Republic was founded based in the Jiangxi province with Mao as elected chairman. 5 encirclement campaigns were launched by Chiang against the Soviet Republic, 4 of which were resisted. The 5th, however, caused the death of thousands of peasants. Mao was removed as the chairman because of this. However, during the Long March of 1934, Mao managed to regain his position. He led thousands of communist marchers to escape the nationalists' encirclement, strategically dividing the forces into columns to confuse the enemy forces, which hindered direct assaults. At the end of the march, wherein only 4,000 troops managed to finish, Mao became the de facto leader of the CCP. Due to the heroism displayed in the Long March, thousands enlisted in Mao's Red Army. After briefly partnering with the nationalists to defeat the Japanese, the civil war between the CCP and the nationalists resumed in 1945, with the former emerging victorious. Mao then proclaimed the New People's Republic of China, or PRC, in 1949, with him as the chairman. Chiang and his nationalist forces retreated to Taiwan and built his government, the Republic of China, or ROC. In December of the same year, Mao succeeded in securing a treaty of mutual assistance with Joseph Stalin, cementing the partnership between the PRC and the Soviet Union. Mao reorganized Chinese society through land redistribution and reduced rent. The population was also classified according to groups of peasants, landlords, laborers, etc., which served as a basis for food rations and housing. Soon, Mao became entangled with the Korean War in 1950 when he decided to intervene on grounds of securing PRC's borders and saving its neighboring communist ally, North Korea. He encouraged this quest amongst the Chinese population through propaganda. When the Korean War ended, the attention shifted toward Taiwan. Despite the Soviet Union and North Korea's recognition of Mao's government, the United States and its allies favored Chiang Kai-shek's ROC. Both governments believed to be legitimate representatives of China and sought to reunify it under their own conflicting terms. This led both governments to attack the other to advance their interests. In 1954, the First Taiwan Strait crisis broke out in Quemoy and Matsu. Mao apparently failed in conquering Taiwan because of U.S. intervention. Along with his international quests, Mao was also occupied with China's domestic affairs. Mao figured that the road towards socialism needed the development of China through the industrialization of cities and collectivization in rural areas. Private property was eventually abolished and resources became communal. While this proved to be initially fruitful, this led to problems in the quality of outputs and resistance to private property confiscation. In 1958, Mao forwarded the Great Leap Forward policy, which focused on physical labor to address the inadequacies of the previous Soviet model of industrialization. Farmers were mandated to use overseeding, deplowing, and over-fertilizing, which, despite the prospects of disaster in doing such, the farmers readily obliged to do so. Despite the overwhelming amount of work, the farmers were too enthralled with Mao's vision that they were obsessed with producing triple the agricultural output, and anyone who would oppose such unrealistic goals was labeled as a rightist and will suffer repression. Alongside this, in 1960, the Soviet Union withdrew technical assistance to China due to differences in their perception of the Great Leap policy. These events led to a total disaster, causing a massive famine in 1959 to 1962. In 1966, Mao advanced the Cultural Revolution, which eliminated all impure elements, basically leaders who opposed him. Millions of people died as a result, along with several of China's cultural heritage. This shows how, despite aiming for a communist classless utopia, Mao found it necessary to still have an imposing state power. In 1971, a shift of international recognition was advanced in the United Nations and favored Mao's PRC over Chiang's ROC without U.S. resistance. In 1912, the bad blood between Mao's PRC and the U.S. ended when President Nixon and Mao held a summit and revived international relations between both countries. Mao died on September 9, 1976, and left a long-lasting legacy in China. Although he was not the main proponent of the communist dream, he certainly headed its mobilization and set the course for China's succeeding leaders. The peak of China's rise certainly did not happen during his lifetime, yet his policies, albeit gruesome ones, laid the groundwork for its fruition. This, of course, cannot justify the death of millions, yet it certainly defined China's communist identity. For many Chinese nationals, Mao was a hero, and his mistakes cannot account for the freedom China gained under his leadership. Up until today, the father of modern China is still highly regarded in the country and is owed to China's great achievements throughout the years. Mao is just an introductory character in this story, as we are to come across the characters that shape the image of the People's Republic of China. Stay tuned as we learn more about the leaders that put China on the map once more. Thank you for joining us today. If you enjoy this episode, subscribe and hit the bell icon to be notified of future episodes.